The Boeing 777 carved through 37,000 feet of Atlantic darkness when Captain Morrison's voice crackled over the intercom with words that would haunt every passenger for the rest of their lives. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We have an unusual situation developing. If there are any military pilots aboard this aircraft, please identify yourselves to the flight attendants immediately. In seat 7A, Major Katerina Ghost Volkov didn't stir. Her slight frame was curled against the window, auburn hair spilling across a travel pillow, lost in the first real sleep she'd managed in 72 hours. The distinguished flying cross pinned inside her carry-on bag caught no light in the overhead compartment. The citation spoke of impossible odds, of bringing home 11 Marines when everyone said it couldn't be done, of flying through hell with a smile that never wavered. But Ghost wasn't smiling now. 3 rows back, a businessman named Henderson was already unbuckling his seatbelt. "I flew Cessnas in the National Guard," he announced loudly, chest puffing with sudden importance. The flight attendant, Maria, nodded grimly and escorted him forward, past the sleeping woman in 7A who had logged more combat hours than most fighter squadrons combined. Captain Morrison's hands trembled slightly on the yoke as he stared at the radar screen. The 6 blips hadn't been there 5 minutes ago. They'd appeared like ghosts themselves, unmarked, unidentified, and closing fast on Flight 447. 293 souls aboard, and whatever was out there in the darkness wasn't responding to any radio calls. "Sir, we have a National Guard pilot," Maria whispered into the cockpit, Henderson trailing behind her with the swagger of someone who'd never seen actual combat. Morrison glanced back. Henderson looked like every weekend warrior he'd ever met, soft around the edges, eager to play hero. "Any others?" Morrison asked. Maria shook her head. "Most passengers are sleeping. It's a red-eye, sir." What they didn't know was that the woman in 7A had been sleeping for exactly 18 minutes. Before that, she'd been awake for 3 straight days, debriefing a mission that officially never happened, in a place that didn't exist on any map. Her body had finally surrendered to exhaustion somewhere over Greenland, her mind still echoing with the sound of rotor blades and the weight of decisions that saved lives and ended others. The radar blips continued their approach. Henderson studied the instruments with wide eyes, his Cessna experience suddenly feeling inadequate against whatever nightmare was unfolding at cruising altitude. Outside the cockpit windows, the first hint of dawn painted the horizon in blood-red strokes, and Captain Morrison wondered if any of them would live to see the sunrise complete its journey across the sky. Henderson cleared his throat nervously. "Captain, I should mention, my experience is mostly in single-engine aircraft. Visual flight rules. This situation, it's a bit outside my wheelhouse." His voice carried the tremor of a man realizing he was about to be tested far beyond his capabilities. The cockpit fell silent except for the steady hum of engines and the ominous ping of the radar tracking 6 unknown contacts. Morrison's jaw tightened as he processed Henderson's admission. Visual flight rules. Weekend flights around suburbia. Meanwhile, 6 military-grade aircraft were closing on their position with intentions unknown, and his co-pilot Jake was running through emergency procedures with the desperate efficiency of someone who knew they were outmatched. "Sir, they're not responding to any frequency," Jake reported, his voice steady despite the sweat beading on his forehead. "Military, civilian, emergency, nothing. And their flight profile," he paused, checking the radar again. "They're maintaining perfect formation. This isn't random." The intercom crackled again, and Morrison made a decision that would either save them all or doom them. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to need everyone to remain calm. We're experiencing some unusual air traffic in our vicinity, and I need to ask again, are there any military pilots aboard this aircraft? Anyone with combat experience?" In the passenger cabin, the announcement cut through the ambient noise like a blade. Conversation stopped. Children pressed against windows, searching the darkness for threats their young minds couldn't comprehend. Business travelers clutched their devices, suddenly aware that their quarterly reports might never be filed. But in 7A, Ghost remained motionless, her breathing deep and even. Her subconscious mind, however, was already processing the words. Combat experience. The phrase triggered memories buried beneath layers of exhaustion, the weight of a helmet, the vibration of a Black Hawks collective, the taste of desert sand mixed with cordite and fear. A flight attendant named David was making his way through the cabin now, asking quietly, personally, row by row, passenger by passenger. A retired Air Force mechanic in 12C shook his head apologetically. A Navy radioman in 23F offered his services but admitted he'd never actually flown anything. The search was becoming desperate. Henderson, meanwhile, was staring at the radar with growing horror. "Captain, I need to be honest with you. If those aircraft are hostile, if they're military-trained pilots, I don't have the skills to help you evade them. I can barely handle crosswind landings in a Cessna." Morrison closed his eyes briefly, then opened them with renewed determination. The blips were 12 miles out and closing. Whatever was going to happen would happen in the next few minutes. He reached for the radio one more time, broadcasting on the emergency frequency. "Unknown aircraft approaching Northwest Flight 447. This is Captain James Morrison. Please identify yourselves and state your intentions. We are a civilian aircraft with 293 souls on board." The response was immediate and chilling. 6 clicks on the radio. Precise, military, coordinated. A signal that meant they were being heard but wouldn't be answered. In the passenger cabin, David, the flight attendant, had reached row 6. One more row, and he'd reached the sleeping woman whose dreams were filled with the echoes of rotors and gunfire. David's hand hesitated as he approached 7A. The woman appeared to be in deep sleep, her face peaceful despite the chaos unfolding around them. Something about her stillness seemed different from the other passengers, not the restless shifting of commercial travel, but the absolute repose of someone who had learned to find rest in impossible circumstances. "Ma'am," he whispered, gently touching her shoulder. "Ma'am, I'm sorry to wake you, but we have an emergency situation." Ghost's eyes opened instantly, completely alert, no trace of grogginess. It was a response trained into her through years of combat deployments, where the difference between sleep and wakefulness could mean the difference between life and death for everyone under her command. "What's the situation?" Her voice was calm, professional, with just a hint of an accent that suggested Eastern European roots buried beneath years of American military training. "The captain is looking for any military pilots aboard. We have unknown aircraft approaching our position." David's voice carried the weight of fear that civilian crew members weren't trained to handle. Ghost was already unbuckling her seatbelt, her mind shifting into tactical mode. How many unknowns? What's their approach vector? Are they responding to radio contact? The questions came rapid fire, each one revealing a depth of knowledge that Henderson, still fumbling with radar interpretations in the cockpit, couldn't match. I don't know the details." The captain asked for any pilots to identify themselves. David stepped back as Ghost rose from her seat, and something in her bearing, the precise way she moved, the controlled energy in her posture, made other passengers turn to look. "I need to speak with your captain immediately." It wasn't a request. Ghost moved toward the front of the aircraft with the fluid efficiency of someone accustomed to moving through cramped spaces under pressure. Her civilian clothes, jeans, a simple black t-shirt, worn leather jacket, couldn't disguise the military precision in every step. In the cockpit, Morrison was watching his worst nightmare unfold on radar. The 6 contacts had closed to 8 miles and were beginning to separate, taking positions around Flight 447 like wolves surrounding prey. Henderson was gripping the edge of the instrument panel, his knuckles white, his earlier confidence evaporated. "Captain Morrison," Ghost's voice cut through the tension as she appeared in the cockpit doorway. I understand you're looking for qualified pilots. Morrison turned, saw a woman who looked like she could be anyone's daughter or sister and felt his heart sink. But something in her eyes, a steadiness that Henderson lacked, a familiarity with crisis that couldn't be faked, made him pause. "What's your experience?" he asked, though part of him wondered if he was grasping at straws. Black Hawk pilot, 2 tour Afghanistan, 1 Iraq, specialized in extraction missions behind enemy lines. Ghost moved to the radar display, her eyes immediately comprehending the tactical situation. "They've got you boxed. Classic intercept formation." Morrison felt the first flicker of hope he'd experienced since the unknown aircraft appeared. This woman spoke the language of aerial combat with the casual fluency of someone who lived it. Ghost studied the radar with the focused intensity of a chess master, analyzing a complex position. The 6 contacts had arranged themselves in a perfect hexagonal formation around Flight 447, each maintaining precisely the same distance and altitude. It was textbook military precision, the kind of coordination that spoke of extensive training and clear command structure. "They're not trying to force you down yet," she observed, her finger tracing the positions on the screen. "This is a demonstration. They want you to know they're there, want you to understand that you're completely at their mercy." She glanced at Morrison. "The question is what they want to demonstrate it for." Henderson, still clinging to the instrument panel, managed to find his voice. "Maybe they're just escort aircraft, making sure we stay on course." Ghost's expression didn't change, but Morrison caught the subtle shake of her head. "Escort aircraft announce themselves. They follow standard intercept protocols. These contacts went dark the moment they appeared on radar. That's not escort behavior, that's hunting behavior." Morrison felt his throat tighten. Hunting what? Could be anything. Could be someone on this aircraft they want. Could be the aircraft itself. Could be their testing response times and procedures. Ghost's voice remained clinical, professional. "What matters right now is that they haven't made any overtly hostile moves. As long as they maintain current distance and don't attempt to force a course change, we have options." "What kind of options?" Morrison asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to hear the answer. Ghost was already moving toward the co-pilot's seat. "Jake, I need you to switch seats with me. Captain, I need access to your communication array and flight controls." Her tone brooked no argument. Jake looked to Morrison, who nodded grimly. As the co-pilot vacated his seat, Ghost settled into the right-hand position with the easy familiarity of someone who had spent thousands of hours in military cockpits. Her hands moved across the instruments with practiced precision, checking engine parameters, fuel status, and aircraft performance capabilities. "First thing we need to do is establish communication," she said, reaching for the radio. "Not with them. They've already shown they won't respond. We need to contact air traffic control, declare an emergency, and get military assistance vectored to our position." Morrison nodded, but his expression remained troubled. What if military assistance is what's already out there? What if those aircraft are supposed to be helping us? Ghost paused, her hand hovering over the radio controls. It was a question that cut to the heart of their dilemma. In her experience, friendly aircraft identified themselves. They followed protocols. They communicated. The silence surrounding Flight 447 felt anything but friendly. "Then we're about to find out just how friendly they really are," she said quietly, and keyed the radio to the emergency frequency. Ghost's transmission cut through the static-filled airwaves with military precision. "Mayday, mayday, mayday. This is Northwest Flight 447, heavy Boeing 777, currently at flight level 370, approximately 400 miles northeast of Gander. We are being shadowed by 6 unidentified military aircraft maintaining formation at our 12, 2, 4, 6, 8, and 10 o'clock positions. Request immediate assistance and vectors to nearest diversion airfield." The response came within seconds, but not from air traffic control. A voice, electronically distorted but unmistakably authoritative, filled the cockpit. Flight 447, you are ordered to maintain current heading and altitude. Do not deviate from your flight plan. Do not attempt to contact ground control again. Morrison felt ice water flood his veins. The voice carried the unmistakable tone of military command, but something about the electronic distortion felt wrong. Professional military communications didn't hide behind voice scramblers unless operational security was paramount. Ghost's reaction was immediate and telling. Her posture shifted, shoulders squaring, hands moving to defensive positions on the controls. "That's not standard intercept protocol," she said quietly. "Military aircraft conducting legitimate operations don't use voice distortion with civilian aircraft." Henderson, who had been listening with growing horror, finally found his voice. "What does that mean? What do they want with us?" "It means," Ghost said, her eyes scanning the radar display, "that we're not dealing with a routine military exercise." She turned to Morrison. "Captain, I need to know everything about this flight. Passenger manifest, cargo manifest, any special circumstances that might make this aircraft a target." Morrison's mind raced. "It's a standard civilian flight. Business passengers, tourists, nothing unusual in the cargo hold except—" Wait. His face went pale. There was a last-minute addition to the cargo manifest. Diplomatic pouch, State Department courier. Ghost's expression hardened. What kind of diplomatic pouch requires a dedicated courier on a civilian flight? "I don't know. The paperwork was classified above my clearance level. The courier, he was supposed to be in first class, but he never boarded. Said there was a family emergency, transferred to a later flight." The implications hung in the air like smoke from a funeral pyre. Ghost was already reaching for her phone, fingers flying over the screen. "I need to make some calls. People who might know what's really happening here." She paused, looking directly at Morrison. "Captain, whatever's in that diplomatic pouch, someone wanted it badly enough to intercept a civilian airliner. That makes every person on this aircraft a potential casualty." The electronic voice crackled through the radio again. "Flight 447, you have 30 minutes to reach waypoint Bravo 77. Maintain current speed and altitude. Any deviation will be considered a hostile act." Ghost stared at the navigation display, calculating distances and fuel consumption with the rapid mental arithmetic of combat flying. Waypoint B-77 was over empty ocean, far from any commercial air routes or emergency landing sites. Whatever was planned for Flight 447, it would happen in a place where there would be no witnesses and no immediate rescue. Ghost's fingers moved across her phone screen with practiced efficiency, accessing encrypted messaging applications that most civilians didn't know existed. Her first contact was a number she'd hoped never to use again, a direct line to a man who officially didn't exist, working for an agency that had no name. "Raven, this is Ghost. I need immediate intel on a State Department diplomatic pouch that was supposed to be aboard Northwest 447 tonight." She spoke quietly, but Morrison could hear the tension underlying her professional tone. The response came back in less than 30 seconds. "Ghost, where the hell are you? Your flight was supposed to be grounded 12 hours ago. There's been a security breach." Morrison felt the blood drain from his face. "Security breach? What kind of security breach?" Ghost held up a hand, continuing her conversation. "Raven, I'm currently aboard 447. We have 6 unidentified military aircraft in formation around us, and they're directing us to a waypoint over empty ocean. What was in that diplomatic pouch?" The pause that followed lasted an eternity. When Raven's voice returned, it carried the weight of classified information that could reshape international relations. "Ghost, that pouch contained evidence of a planned terrorist attack on American soil. The courier who was supposed to be aboard. We found his body 3 hours ago. Someone didn't want that information reaching Washington. The cockpit fell silent except for the steady hum of engines and the ominous ping of radar tracking 6 hostile contacts. Morrison realized that his aircraft had become the center of an international conspiracy, and every passenger aboard was now a witness who couldn't be allowed to survive. Ghost closed her eyes briefly, processing the implications. When she opened them, her expression had transformed from professional concern to cold, tactical calculation. "Captain, we have a problem that goes far beyond aviation emergency procedures. Those aircraft out there aren't trying to escort us somewhere safe. They're herding us to a kill zone." Henderson, who had been listening with growing horror, slumped against the instrument panel. "We're all going to die, aren't we?" "Not if I have anything to say about it," Ghost replied, her voice carrying the absolute conviction of someone who had faced impossible odds before and lived to tell about it. She turned to Morrison. "I need you to trust me completely. What I'm about to ask you to do goes against every instinct you have as a commercial pilot, but it's our only chance of getting these people home alive." Morrison nodded grimly. After 30 years of flying, he had learned to recognize competence when he saw it, and the woman beside him radiated the kind of calm authority that came from facing death and winning. Ghost's plan unfolded with the methodical precision of someone who had spent years turning impossible situations into tactical advantages. "Those aircraft are maintaining formation because they expect us to be predictable. Commercial aircraft follow flight plans, maintain altitudes, and respond to air traffic control. They're counting on us to behave like civilians." "We are civilians," Morrison pointed out. "No," Ghost said quietly. "Right now, we're combatants. The moment they started herding us toward that kill zone, this became a military operation. And I don't lose military operations." She was already pulling up weather data on the flight management system, studying wind patterns and storm systems across their flight path. "There's a low-pressure system moving up from the Caribbean. Severe turbulence, embedded thunderstorms, visibility near zero. If we can reach the edge of that weather system, we can disappear." Morrison stared at the weather radar display, seeing nothing but chaos and danger. "You're talking about flying a wide-body airliner through severe turbulence with 293 passengers aboard. That's not evasive maneuvering, that's suicide." "Captain, what's the survival rate for passengers in a controlled crash into the Atlantic Ocean?" Ghost's question was blunt, clinical. Morrison didn't need to check any manuals. 0. "Then we try something else." Ghost's hands were already moving across the flight controls, making minute adjustments that would appear routine to outside observers but were actually preparation for aerial combat maneuvering. "I need you to trust me, Captain. I've brought people home from situations that were statistically impossible to survive. This is just another day at the office." Her fingers found the intercom button, and her voice filled the passenger cabin with calm authority. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Major Katerina Volkov. I'm a military pilot, and I've taken over flight operations to deal with our current situation. We're going to experience some unusual flight characteristics over the next few minutes. I need everyone to remain in their seats with seatbelts securely fastened. Flight attendants, prepare for extreme maneuvering." In the passenger cabin, 293 people suddenly realized that their quiet red-eye flight had become something else entirely. The voice over the intercom carried an authority that couldn't be faked, and passengers who had been grumbling about the unusual announcements fell silent with the recognition that their lives now depended on a woman most of them had never noticed sleeping in 7A. Ghost's hands moved to the throttles, beginning the delicate process of changing their flight profile without alerting the surrounding aircraft to her intentions. The first rule of aerial combat was that surprise was the most valuable weapon in any pilot's arsenal, and she intended to use every advantage available. The 6 hostile aircraft maintained their perfect formation, unaware that the predictable civilian airliner they were escorting to destruction had just become something else entirely. Ghost's transformation from exhausted passenger to combat pilot was complete, and Flight 447 was about to discover what it meant to be flown by someone who had earned the call sign, Ghost, by disappearing when everyone expected her to die. The weather system Ghost had identified on radar was still 80 miles ahead, a churning mass of thunderstorms and turbulence that would challenge even the most experienced military pilots. But between Flight 447 and that potential salvation lay open ocean and 6 hostile aircraft whose pilots were undoubtedly trained in air-to-air combat. Ghost began her approach with the patience of a chess master, making seemingly routine adjustments that were actually preparation for aerial warfare. She reduced engine power by 2%, barely noticeable to outside observers, but enough to begin altering their energy state. She adjusted the autopilot heading by half a degree, a change so subtle that it would take several minutes for the surrounding aircraft to recognize the deviation. "What are you doing?" Morrison asked, watching instruments that showed they were gradually falling behind their prescribed flight plan. "Buying time and changing the geometry of engagement," Ghost replied, her eyes constantly moving between the radar display and the engine parameters. "Those pilots out there are expecting us to maintain speed and heading until we reach their kill zone. Instead, we're going to force them to make decisions they haven't planned for." The electronic voice crackled through the radio again. "Flight 447, you are deviating from assigned parameters. Correct your heading immediately." Ghost ignored the transmission, instead reaching for Morrison's headset. When she spoke, her voice carried the unmistakable authority of someone accustomed to command. "Unknown aircraft. This is Major Katerina Volkov, United States Army, currently in command of this flight. Identify yourselves and state your intentions, or be considered hostile forces engaging in an act of war against a civilian airliner." The silence that followed was profound and telling. Military pilots conducting legitimate operations would have responded immediately with proper identification. The continued radio silence confirmed Ghost's worst fears about their situation. Henderson, who had been forgotten in the corner of the cockpit, finally spoke up. "Major, shouldn't we just do what they want? Maybe if we cooperate." "Cooperate with whom?" Ghost interrupted, her voice sharp. "These aircraft have no identification, no official mission status, and they're directing us away from all commercial air routes toward empty ocean. In my experience, people who want to help you don't hide behind voice scramblers and refuse to identify themselves." On the radar display, the 6 hostile contacts were beginning to adjust their positions, responding to Flight 447's subtle course changes. Ghost watched their movements with the analytical eye of someone who had spent years studying aerial tactics and enemy behavior patterns. "They're good," she admitted grudgingly. "Professional spacing, coordinated movement, textbook formation flying. Whoever trained these pilots knew what they were doing." She paused, studying the radar contacts more closely. "But they're flying like they're escorting a predictable civilian aircraft. They haven't adapted to the possibility that their target might fight back." Morrison was beginning to understand the depth of their situation. "You're treating this like aerial combat." "Because that's exactly what this is," Ghost replied. "The only question is whether we're going to be victims or combatants. I vote for combatants." Her hands moved to the flight controls with renewed purpose, and Flight 447 began a series of maneuvers that would either save them all or kill them in the next few minutes. Ghost's first combat maneuver was so subtle that even Morrison almost missed it. She adjusted the aircraft's angle of attack by less than 1 degree, while simultaneously reducing power another 2%, creating a flight profile that appeared to be responding to turbulence, but was actually designed to force the surrounding aircraft into a tactical disadvantage. "What you're seeing," Ghost explained quietly, her eyes never leaving the instruments, is something called energy management. Every aircraft has a specific combination of altitude, speed, and position that gives it maximum tactical advantage. I'm changing our energy state to force them out of their optimal engagement envelope. The hostile aircraft began responding to Flight 447's changes, but their movements revealed something crucial. They were flying predetermined patterns rather than adapting dynamically to changing circumstances. It was the kind of rigid tactical thinking that Ghost had exploited successfully in combat zones across 2 continents. "They're following a script," she observed. "Someone planned this operation down to the minute, but they didn't account for variables. They expected a frightened civilian crew following orders, not tactical maneuvering." Morrison was beginning to see the chess match unfolding on his radar screen. What happens when they realize we're not following their script? "That's when things get interesting," Ghost replied grimly. The answer came sooner than expected. The lead aircraft broke formation, accelerating toward Flight 447's nose while transmitting a new message. "Flight 447, you will return to assigned heading immediately or face the consequences." Ghost's response was to push the nose down slightly and add power, placing the Boeing 777 into a shallow dive that increased their speed while decreasing their altitude. To the passengers, it felt like routine flight adjustments. To the hostile pilots, it was an unmistakable signal that their quarry was no longer cooperating. "Warning shots incoming," Ghost announced calmly, as if she were commenting on the weather. Morrison's blood turned to ice. "Warning shots at a civilian airliner. They need to demonstrate capability without actually destroying us yet," Ghost explained. "Whatever's in that diplomatic pouch, someone wants it badly enough to risk an international incident. They'll try intimidation before they resort to actually shooting us down." The first tracer round streaked past Flight 447's starboard wing, close enough that passengers on that side of the aircraft could see the brief flashes of light in the darkness. The cabin filled with screams and panicked voices as people realized they were under attack. Ghost's voice filled the intercom with steady authority. "Ladies and gentlemen, remain calm and stay in your seats. We are taking evasive action. Trust your crew and follow all instructions from flight attendants." Then she turned to Morrison with a grim smile. "Captain, I hope you're ready for the ride of your life. We're about to find out what this aircraft can really do." Ghost's hands moved across the controls with the fluid precision of a concert pianist, and Flight 447 began maneuvering like no commercial airliner in aviation history. The first evasive turn was gentle enough that passengers might have mistaken it for a course correction, but it placed them at an angle that made accurate fire from the pursuing aircraft significantly more difficult. "Commercial aircraft have one advantage in aerial combat that most people never consider," Ghost explained as she monitored engine parameters and structural stress indicators. "We're built to carry tremendous loads through severe weather. That means we can handle G-forces and maneuvering loads that would tear apart smaller aircraft." The hostile formation was adapting now, breaking their perfect geometry to pursue Flight 447 through increasingly aggressive maneuvers. Morrison watched in amazement as Ghost anticipated each movement, turning the Boeing 777's size and apparent sluggishness into tactical advantages. "They're trying to box us in again," she observed, watching radar contacts repositioning around their flight path. "But they're also burning fuel at an unsustainable rate with these aggressive maneuvers. Time is on our side if we can stay alive long enough to reach that weather system." The weather system in question was now visible on the forward radar display, a massive wall of thunderstorms and turbulence that looked more like a barrier than a refuge. But Ghost was flying toward it with the determination of someone who knew that sometimes the most dangerous path was also the only path to survival. "Major," Henderson spoke up from his corner, What happens if we actually make it into those storms? Ghost glanced at the weather radar, calculating wind speeds and turbulence intensity with the rapid mental arithmetic of combat flying. Then we find out if I'm as good as I think I am, she said quietly. Because flying a wide-body airliner through severe turbulence while evading hostile aircraft is about to become the most challenging thing I've ever attempted. Behind them, the 6 hostile aircraft were closing distance, their formation tightening as they prepared for whatever would happen when Flight 447 reached the edge of the storm system. The electronic voice filled the radio one final time. Flight 447, this is your last warning. Comply immediately or face destruction. Ghost's response was to push the aircraft into a steeper dive, trading altitude for speed as she raced toward the churning darkness ahead. Hold on, everyone, she announced over the intercom. We're going into the storm. The first wisps of cloud engulfed Flight 447, and suddenly the cabin was filled with the sounds of rain against windows and the deep rumble of thunder that seemed to shake the aircraft's very soul. Ghost flew into the storm with the confidence of someone who had learned that sometimes salvation lay on the far side of hell itself. The thunderstorm engulfed Flight 447 like a living thing, its tendrils of cloud and electricity reaching out to embrace the aircraft with violent intensity. Ghost fought the controls as turbulence threw the Boeing 777 around like a toy, but her hands remained steady, her voice calm as she guided them deeper into the maelstrom. Severe turbulence, everyone stay strapped in, she announced over the intercom, though her words were nearly drowned out by the roar of wind and rain against the fuselage. Lightning illuminated the cockpit in strobing flashes, revealing Morrison's white-knuckled grip on his armrests and Henderson's terrified expression. On the radar display, the 6 hostile contacts were falling behind, unable to maintain formation in the severe weather conditions. Ghost had counted on their reluctance to follow a civilian airliner into conditions that could easily destroy military aircraft not designed for heavy weather operations. They're breaking off, Morrison observed, watching the hostile blips separate and turn away from the storm system. For now, Ghost replied grimly, but they'll be waiting when we come out the other side. This storm only buys us time. It doesn't solve our fundamental problem. The aircraft shuddered through another massive downdraft, losing 3,000 feet of altitude in seconds before Ghost could arrest the descent. In the passenger cabin, people were praying in half a dozen languages, their voices mixing with the sounds of storm and stressed metal. But Ghost was in her element now. The chaos and violence of the thunderstorm was familiar territory, not so different from flying through hostile fire in a combat zone, just with different rules and different stakes. She rode the turbulence like a surfer riding a massive wave, using the storm's own energy to maintain control. We need a plan, Morrison said, having to shout over the noise. Even if we get through this storm, those aircraft will be waiting. Ghost nodded, her mind already working through possibilities. We change the game entirely. Instead of trying to outrun them or hide from them, we make this everyone else's problem. She reached for the radio controls, selecting the international emergency frequency. Mayday, Mayday, Mayday. This is Northwest Flight 447, declaring emergency. We are under attack by unidentified military aircraft and have taken refuge in severe weather. Request immediate assistance from any military forces in the area. The response was immediate and came from multiple sources. Flight 447, this is Canadian Forces Greenwood. We have fighters scrambling to your location. Maintain current heading and altitude. Flight 447, U.S. Coast Guard Halifax has rescue assets en route. What is your current status? Northwest 447, Halifax Tower. You are cleared for landing runway 5. Emergency vehicles are standing by. After landing, taxi to the secure area marked by the yellow vehicles. Do not shut down engines until instructed. Ghost acknowledged the clearance while studying the scene below. Something felt wrong about the reception waiting for them. Too many agencies, too much coordination, too much preparation for what should have been a routine emergency landing. Her instincts, honed by years of operations where the difference between friends and enemies wasn't always clear, were screaming warnings. "Captain," she said quietly to Morrison, "after we land, I want you to keep the engines running until I give you the all clear. Something doesn't feel right about this reception committee." Morrison nodded, his own 30 years of flying experience telling him that Ghost's caution was warranted. The woman who had saved their lives wasn't the type to be paranoid without cause. The landing was textbook perfect, Ghost's military training evident in the precise way she handled the approach and touchdown. As Flight 447 rolled toward the designated secure area, she could see figures moving around the yellow vehicles, too many of them wearing tactical gear rather than the standard uniforms of airport security or federal investigators. "Ladies and gentlemen," Ghost announced over the intercom, "we have landed safely in Halifax. However, I need everyone to remain seated with seatbelts fastened until we receive clearance from ground control. This is a security precaution, not an emergency." Through the cockpit windows, Ghost watched as armed figures took positions around the aircraft. Their movements were too coordinated, too military for standard law enforcement. These weren't investigators responding to an emergency. They were operators conducting a planned operation. Her phone buzzed with an encrypted message from Raven. "Ghost, do not deplane. Repeat, do not deplane. The people waiting for you are not friendly. Extraction team en route." Ghost's blood turned to ice as she realized the implications. The 6 unidentified aircraft hadn't been the primary threat. They had been herding Flight 447 toward this trap. The real operation was happening on the ground, where everyone who had witnessed the air piracy could be controlled, questioned, and potentially silenced. "Captain," she said urgently, "we need to abort this landing. Full power, take off immediately." But it was too late. Ground vehicles were already moving to block the runway, and armed figures were approaching the aircraft from multiple directions. Morrison's hands moved toward the throttles, but Ghost stopped him with a gentle touch. "We're boxed in," she said quietly, "but the game isn't over yet." She reached for the radio, broadcasting on the emergency frequency that she knew legitimate authorities would be monitoring. "Halifax Tower, this is Northwest 447. We are surrounded by unidentified armed personnel who are not displaying proper credentials. Request immediate assistance from legitimate law enforcement agencies." The response came not from the tower, but from one of the armed figures now positioned beneath the aircraft. "Major Volkov, you will deplane immediately and surrender yourself for debriefing. This is a matter of national security." Ghost smiled grimly. They knew her name, her rank, her history. This operation had been planned specifically around her presence aboard Flight 447. Someone had known she would be on this flight, had known she would respond to the emergency, had planned to use her skills to guide the aircraft exactly where they wanted it. "Gentlemen," she announced over the intercom to her passengers, "it appears our adventure isn't quite over yet." The standoff on the Halifax tarmac stretched into its second hour as Ghost refused to open the aircraft doors or shut down the engines. Outside, the circle of armed figures maintained their positions while a growing crowd of legitimate law enforcement agencies arrived to investigate the situation. Ghost had turned Flight 447 into an inadvertent media sensation. News helicopters circled overhead, their cameras capturing images of a civilian airliner surrounded by military personnel in an international incident that was rapidly escalating beyond anyone's ability to contain. "Major Volkov," the voice from outside continued, You are interfering with a legitimate counterterrorism operation. Open the doors immediately." Ghost's response was broadcast on open radio frequencies that she knew news organizations would be monitoring. "I am Major Katerina Volkov, United States Army, and I am responsible for the safety of 293 civilian passengers aboard this aircraft. The personnel outside this aircraft have refused to identify themselves, display no proper credentials, and their behavior is consistent with hostile forces rather than legitimate law enforcement." The effect was immediate and devastating to whoever had planned the ground operation. Within minutes, Ghost could see legitimate Royal Canadian Mounted Police vehicles arriving, followed by officials from Transport Canada and representatives from the U.S. Embassy. The mysterious armed figures found themselves outnumbered and outmaneuvered by real authorities responding to an international incident. Through the cockpit radio, Ghost heard the voice of someone with actual authority. "This is Commissioner Williams, Royal Canadian Mounted Police. All personnel around the aircraft will identify themselves immediately and produce proper credentials or be subject to arrest." The mysterious figures began to withdraw, but not before one of them transmitted a final message directly to Ghost. "Major, this isn't over. The evidence aboard this aircraft threatens national security, and there are people who will do anything to protect those interests." As the hostile personnel retreated, Ghost finally felt safe enough to begin shutdown procedures. But she knew that landing in Halifax was just the beginning of a much larger battle. The diplomatic pouch that was supposed to be aboard Flight 447 contained information that powerful people wanted to suppress, and those people had just demonstrated they possessed military assets and the willingness to use them against civilian targets. The passengers of Flight 447 had become witnesses to something much larger and more dangerous than air piracy. They had stumbled into the middle of a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of government and military command structures. Ghost looked out at the Halifax skyline, knowing that somewhere in the darkness, people were already planning their next move. The woman who had earned her call sign by disappearing when everyone expected her to die realized that this time, disappearing might not be enough. This time, she might have to stand and fight in the light of day, with the whole world watching. The debriefing process at Halifax International Airport revealed the true scope of the conspiracy that Flight 447 had unwittingly disrupted. As Ghost sat across from Commissioner Williams and a representative from the U.S. Embassy, the pieces of the puzzle began forming a picture that was both more complex and more dangerous than anyone had initially realized. "Major Volkov," Commissioner Williams began, "we've run preliminary background checks on the personnel who surrounded your aircraft. They don't exist in any official capacity. No military records, no law enforcement credentials, no government authorization for their presence on Canadian soil." The embassy representative, a woman named Sarah Chen who carried herself with the quiet authority of intelligence work, leaned forward. "Major, we need to discuss the diplomatic pouch that was supposed to be aboard your flight. The information it contained. It's more sensitive than you were told." Ghost had been expecting this conversation. The evidence of a planned terrorist attack that Raven mentioned. Chen's expression grew grim. That was the cover story. The real contents of that pouch would have exposed a network of corruption involving defense contractors, military procurement, and elected officials. People with the resources to field unmarked military aircraft and conduct operations on foreign soil. The implications hit Ghost like a physical blow. The attack on Flight 447 wasn't about preventing terrorist intelligence from reaching Washington. It was about silencing witnesses to military assets being used for illegal operations. "Exactly," Chen confirmed. "And now you have 293 passengers who can testify to seeing unidentified military aircraft conducting hostile operations against a civilian airliner. That's a problem for people who prefer to operate in shadows. Commissioner Williams spread out photographs on the table, images captured by news helicopters and airport security cameras during the tarmac standoff. We've identified the vehicles used by the hostile personnel. They were rented using falsified credentials, but the payment trail leads to a series of shell companies that we're still investigating. Ghost studied the photographs with the analytical eye of someone trained in intelligence gathering. The equipment visible in the images was military-grade but commercially available. The tactical gear was professional but unmarked. Everything about the operation suggested people with military training and unlimited funding, but no official oversight. "What about the 6 aircraft that intercepted us?" Ghost asked. Chen's expression grew even more troubled. "They vanished completely. No radar tracks after you entered the storm system, no flight plans filed, no maintenance records at any military or civilian airfield. It's as if they never existed. Except for the testimony of everyone aboard Flight 447, Ghost pointed out. "Which is exactly why this conspiracy goes so deep," Chen replied. "Major, there are people who would prefer that Flight 447 had never landed safely. Your skills as a pilot and your refusal to follow their script has exposed an operation that was supposed to be completely deniable." Commissioner Williams gathered the photographs, his expression grave. "Major Volkov, we can provide protection while you're in Canada, but eventually you'll have to return to the United States. When you do, you'll be walking into a situation where some very powerful people consider you a threat to national security." Ghost had faced hostile forces before, but never enemies who wore the uniform of her own country while conducting operations that violated every principle she had sworn to defend. The woman who had earned her call sign by disappearing from impossible situations realized that this time, the enemy would be looking for her among friends, and there would be nowhere to hide. The secure conference room in the U.S. Embassy felt more like a bunker than a diplomatic facility, as Ghost reviewed classified documents that painted a picture of corruption reaching into the highest levels of the defense establishment. Each page revealed another layer of the conspiracy that had nearly cost 293 lives over the Atlantic. "The network we're dealing with," Chen explained, "involves defense contractors who have been selling military equipment to unauthorized buyers, military officers who have been facilitating those sales, and elected officials who have been providing political protection in exchange for campaign contributions." Ghost studied financial records showing millions of dollars in irregular transactions, and the diplomatic pouch was going to expose all of this. The pouch contained recorded conversations, financial records, and photographic evidence of meetings between conspirators. It was compiled by a whistleblower inside the Defense Department who was murdered 3 days before your flight. Chen paused, her expression troubled. The same whistleblower who had arranged to be the courier aboard Flight 447. The scope of the conspiracy was staggering. Ghost realized that the 6 unidentified aircraft that had intercepted them were probably part of a larger fleet of military assets that had been diverted from official channels and were being used for operations that couldn't withstand official scrutiny. So when the courier didn't board, they decided to intercept the aircraft anyway, Ghost asked. They couldn't risk the possibility that the information had been transferred to another passenger or hidden aboard the aircraft, Chen confirmed. The plan was to force Flight 447 to land at a remote location where everyone aboard could be questioned, and if necessary, silenced. Ghost felt a chill as she realized how close they had come to mass murder. The storm system saved our lives by forcing them to abort their plan. Your decision to fly into that storm saved everyone's lives, Chen corrected. Major, what you accomplished over the Atlantic goes far beyond exceptional piloting. You disrupted an operation that would have covered up treason and murder. Commissioner Williams entered the conference room carrying a secure telephone. "Major Volkov, there's someone in Washington who needs to speak with you immediately." The voice on the phone belonged to someone Ghost recognized from classified briefings, a deputy director of the Defense Intelligence Agency who operated at levels where national security decisions were made. "Major Volkov, this is Deputy Director Harrison. I want you to know that your actions aboard Flight 447 have potentially saved American lives and exposed a network of traitors that we've been investigating for months." Ghost felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. "Sir, what's the current threat level to the passengers who witnessed these events?" "That's what we need to discuss, Major. The people behind this conspiracy are desperate, and they still have access to military assets. Until we can roll up their entire network, everyone aboard that flight remains at risk." Harrison's voice carried the weight of someone making decisions that would affect international relations. "Major, I'm offering you a choice. You can disappear into witness protection and live quietly while we handle this investigation. Or you can help us finish what you started over the Atlantic." Ghost looked out the embassy window at Halifax's skyline, thinking about 293 passengers who had trusted her with their lives, and about the enemies who were still out there planning their next move. "Sir," she said quietly, "when do we start?" Ghost's decision to join the investigation rather than disappear into witness protection was met with immediate action from the intelligence community. Within hours of her phone call with Deputy Director Harrison, she found herself aboard a military transport aircraft heading back to the United States, but not to any destination that appeared on civilian aviation charts. The secure facility where they landed was officially designated as a training installation, but Ghost's experienced eye recognized it as something much more significant. The aircraft parked on the tarmac included surveillance planes, electronic warfare platforms, and what appeared to be the kind of assets used for operations that required absolute deniability. "Welcome to the place that doesn't exist," Deputy Director Harrison said as he greeted Ghost on the tarmac. He was a lean man in his 50s whose appearance suggested decades of making difficult decisions in service of national security. "Major, what you're about to see is part of a joint task force operation that has been investigating defense contractor corruption for 3 years." As they walked toward the main facility, Harrison outlined the scope of the investigation. "The network we're dealing with has tentacles reaching into Congress, the Pentagon, and major defense contractors. They've been selling military equipment to foreign buyers, conducting unauthorized operations using diverted assets, and eliminating anyone who threatens to expose them." Ghost was led into a briefing room where wall-mounted screens displayed organizational charts, financial flow diagrams, and surveillance photographs that revealed the true extent of the conspiracy. At the center of it all was a defense contractor named Meridian Systems, whose official business was providing logistics support to military operations worldwide. "Meridian's unofficial business," Harrison explained, "involves maintaining a private air force of unmarked military aircraft that can be deployed for operations that the government needs to deny knowledge of. The problem is that some of those operations have nothing to do with national security and everything to do with protecting Meridian's business interests." Ghost studied the photographs of aircraft that looked remarkably similar to the ones that had intercepted Flight 447. So, when the diplomatic pouch threatened to expose their network, they used their private air force to intercept a civilian airliner. Exactly, and they would have succeeded if they hadn't counted on having a predictable civilian crew aboard that aircraft. Harrison turned to face Ghost directly. "Major, your military experience and tactical thinking turned what should have been a successful cover-up into an international incident that's exposed their entire operation." The briefing continued for hours, revealing layer after layer of corruption, murder, and treason that reached into the highest levels of government. Ghost began to understand that Flight 447 had been just one operation in a much larger pattern of criminal activity that had been hidden behind the facade of national security. "What's our next move?" Ghost asked as the briefing concluded. Harrison's smile was grim but determined. "We're going to use their own tactics against them. Major, how would you like to fly again? Because we're going to need the Ghost to disappear one more time, right into the heart of their operation." The mission planning session that followed would have been familiar to Ghost from her combat deployments, except this time the enemy wore American uniforms and operated from American soil. The target was a Meridian Systems facility in Nevada, where intelligence indicated the company was maintaining its fleet of unmarked military aircraft. "The challenge," Harrison explained as they studied satellite imagery, "is that Meridian has legitimate contracts with the military, so their facilities are protected by official security protocols. We can't just conduct a raid without risking exposure of legitimate classified operations." Ghost studied the facility layout with the analytical eye of someone trained in military reconnaissance. "So, we need intelligence from inside the facility, something that would justify official action." "Which is where you come in, Major. Meridian has been recruiting experienced military pilots for their Special Projects Division. Your combat record and recent publicity from the Flight 447 incident make you exactly the kind of asset they would want to recruit." The plan was both elegant and dangerous. Ghost would approach Meridian Systems as a disillusioned military pilot looking for lucrative private sector work. Her public role in saving Flight 447 would provide credibility, while her apparent willingness to leave military service would suggest someone who could be corrupted. "The risk," Harrison warned, "is that if they discover you're working undercover, you'll be dealing with people who have already demonstrated their willingness to commit mass murder to protect their interests." Ghost nodded, understanding the stakes. "How long do I have to gather the intelligence you need?" 48 hours, Major. After that, we move whether we have everything we need or not. There are too many lives at risk to wait any longer." As Ghost prepared for what might be her most dangerous mission, she thought about the passengers of Flight 447 who were still living under the threat of people who viewed civilian lives as acceptable casualties in their pursuit of profit and power. The woman who had earned her call sign by disappearing when everyone expected her to die was about to disappear one final time into the heart of a conspiracy that threatened the very foundations of military honor and national security. Ghost's approach to Meridian Systems headquarters in Nevada was carefully orchestrated to appear spontaneous, while actually being the result of meticulous intelligence planning. She arrived driving a rented car, dressed in civilian clothes that suggested someone recently separated from military service, but still carrying herself with unmistakable military bearing. The Meridian facility occupied several hundred acres of desert landscape, its buildings designed to blend with the surrounding terrain while housing capabilities that went far beyond what their public contracts would suggest. Ghost's trained eye identified defensive positions, communication arrays, and aircraft hangars that were significantly larger than necessary for routine logistics operations. "Major Katerina Volkov to see Mr. Richardson," she told the security guard at the main gate, using the name of Meridian's Director of Special Operations that intelligence had identified as her most likely point of contact. The response was immediate and telling. Instead of the routine visitor processing she expected, Ghost found herself escorted directly to Richardson's office by security personnel, who moved with the precision of military operators rather than corporate security guards. Richardson himself was a man in his early 50s, whose expensive suit couldn't entirely disguise the bearing of someone with extensive special operations background. His office was decorated with military memorabilia and photographs that suggested service in locations where official military presence was never acknowledged. "Major Volkov," Richardson said as she entered his office, "your timing is impeccable. We've been following your recent adventures with great interest." Ghost settled into the offered chair with the casual confidence of someone accustomed to high-stakes negotiations. "Mr. Richardson, I'm interested in opportunities that would make better use of my skills and provide better compensation than military service." Richardson's smile suggested he was accustomed to recruiting disillusioned military personnel. "Major, your performance aboard Flight 447 demonstrated exactly the kind of tactical thinking and crisis management that we value. But I have to ask, are you prepared for operations that require a certain flexibility regarding official oversight?" "I'm prepared for operations that pay well and allow me to use my skills effectively," Ghost replied, carefully avoiding any direct acknowledgement of illegal activity while suggesting she could be corrupted under the right circumstances. Richardson leaned back in his chair, studying Ghost with the analytical gaze of someone evaluating potential assets. "Major, what would you say if I told you that some of our most important operations never appear in any official records, and that the pilots who conduct those operations are compensated accordingly?" Ghost felt her pulse quicken as Richardson moved closer to admitting the existence of Meridian's illegal operations. "I would say that sounds like the kind of opportunity I'm looking for." "Excellent." Richardson reached for his phone. "Major, I'd like you to meet some of our other pilots, people who, like yourself, found military service too restrictive for their talents." Within minutes, Ghost found herself being escorted toward the aircraft hangars, where she would get her first direct look at the fleet of unmarked military aircraft that had nearly killed everyone aboard Flight 447. Her hidden recording equipment captured every word of Richardson's increasingly incriminating statements about operations that violated both domestic and international law. As they approached the first hangar, Ghost realized she was about to come face to face with the pilots who had intercepted her over the Atlantic, and that her ability to maintain her cover would determine whether she lived to deliver the evidence that could bring down the entire conspiracy. The hangar doors opened to reveal a sight that confirmed Ghost's worst suspicions about Meridian Systems operations. 6 aircraft sat in perfect formation, the same 6 that had intercepted Flight 447 over the Atlantic. They were modified military aircraft with all identifying markings removed, painted in low-visibility colors designed for operations that required complete deniability. "Impressive, isn't it?" Richardson said as he led Ghost between the aircraft. "These beauties can go anywhere in the world, conduct any mission required, and return without leaving any trace of official involvement." Ghost nodded appreciatively while her hidden cameras recorded serial numbers and modifications that would provide intelligence analysts with definitive proof of Meridian's illegal activities. "What kind of missions are we talking about?" "The kind that require pilots who understand that sometimes national security demands actions that can't be officially acknowledged," Richardson replied. His tone suggested he was testing Ghost's willingness to accept morally ambiguous orders. They were approaching a group of pilots conducting pre-flight inspections on their aircraft when Ghost recognized one of them, a tall man with graying temples, whose voice she remembered from the electronic transmissions over the Atlantic. This was the pilot who had threatened to destroy Flight 447 if she didn't comply with their demands. "Major Volkov," Richardson called out, "meet Colonel Davis, one of our most experienced operators." Davis looked up from his inspection checklist, and Ghost saw recognition flicker in his eyes. For a moment, she thought her cover was blown, but Davis simply nodded professionally. "Major Volkov, I heard about your performance aboard that civilian flight. Impressive flying." "Thank you, Colonel," Ghost replied, wondering if Davis was testing her or genuinely didn't realize she was the same pilot who had outmaneuvered his formation in the storm system. Richardson continued the tour, introducing Ghost to other pilots who spoke casually about operations in countries where American military involvement was officially denied, missions that violated international law, and the substantial financial rewards that came with absolute loyalty to Meridian's interests. The beauty of our operation, Richardson explained, is that we provide the government with plausible deniability while handling situations that require military assets but can't withstand official scrutiny. Ghost was recording conversations that would provide prosecutors with evidence of conspiracy, violation of the Neutrality Act, and potentially treason when her phone buzzed with an encrypted message from Harrison. Extraction in 30 minutes. Get clear of the facility. But as Ghost began making excuses to leave, Richardson's expression changed subtly. Major, before you go, there's one more thing I'd like to show you. Something that I think will convince you that joining our organization is in your best interests. The tone of his voice suggested that what had seemed like a recruitment meeting was about to become something much more dangerous, and Ghost realized that her carefully planned extraction might not be possible after all. Richardson led Ghost toward a separate building whose security was noticeably tighter than the rest of the facility. Armed guards checked their identification twice, and Ghost noticed surveillance cameras tracking their movement with mechanical precision that suggested automated threat detection systems. This is where we conduct our most sensitive operations planning, Richardson explained, as they entered a conference room dominated by wall-mounted screens displaying global intelligence feeds. Major, what I'm about to show you is information that could compromise national security if it fell into the wrong hands. Ghost felt her hidden recording equipment capture every word while her mind raced through possible escape scenarios. The facility's security was too tight for a simple walkout, and her extraction team was still 25 minutes away. Richardson activated the screens, which displayed intelligence reports about Flight 447 and its passengers. Ghost's blood ran cold as she realized they had been conducting surveillance on everyone who had witnessed the mid-air interception. As you can see, Major, the passengers aboard Flight 447 represent a significant security risk. They witnessed operations that could compromise ongoing national security missions if their testimony became public. Richardson paused, studying Ghost's reaction carefully. We've been tasked with conducting damage assessment and, if necessary, damage control. The euphemisms couldn't disguise the horrific reality. Meridian was planning to eliminate the witnesses to their illegal operations. 293 innocent people were marked for death to protect a criminal conspiracy. What kind of damage control are we discussing? Ghost asked, fighting to keep her voice steady while her hidden cameras captured evidence of planned mass murder. The kind that ensures national security is protected regardless of the cost, Richardson replied. His tone suggested he was still testing Ghost's willingness to participate in morally unconscionable acts. Ghost's phone buzzed again with a message from Harrison. Facility surrounded. Maintain cover for 5 more minutes. But Richardson was studying Ghost's expression with the analytical gaze of someone trained in detecting deception. Major Volkov, you seem troubled by the concept of operational security. Perhaps Meridian isn't the right fit for your career goals. The subtle change in his tone warned Ghost that her cover might be compromised. In the background, she could hear increased radio chatter from facility security, suggesting that they had detected the approach of her extraction team. Mr. Richardson, Ghost said carefully, I'm interested in profitable opportunities, but I need to understand exactly what I'm being asked to do. Richardson's smile was cold and predatory. Major, what you're being asked to do is prove your loyalty to this organization by participating in the elimination of security threats. starting with the passengers of Flight 447. Ghost realized that the recruitment meeting had been a trap from the beginning. Richardson had never intended to hire her. He had been gathering evidence of her undercover operation while planning to eliminate her along with the other witnesses to Meridian's crimes. As alarms began sounding throughout the facility, Ghost understood that the next few minutes would determine whether the evidence she had gathered would ever reach the prosecutors who could bring the conspiracy to justice. The facility's alarms triggered an immediate lockdown protocol that transformed Meridian's corporate headquarters into a fortress. Steel barriers dropped across doorways, emergency lighting activated, and Ghost could hear the sound of armed personnel moving through corridors with military precision. Richardson's demeanor shifted completely, dropping any pretense of corporate civility. Major Katerina Volkov, Coulson Ghost, United States Army Intelligence, currently operating under deep cover for Defense Intelligence Agency Task Force 7. His recitation of her classified information proved that Meridian had intelligence sources at the highest levels of government. Ghost remained seated, her posture relaxed despite the desperate situation. Years of combat experience had taught her that panic was the enemy of survival, and she needed to buy time for her extraction team to breach the facility's defenses. "Impressive intelligence gathering," she replied calmly, "though I have to question your business model. Mass murder to cover up defense contractor fraud seems like poor risk management." Richardson moved to a wall-mounted control panel, his fingers dancing across switches that activated additional security measures. "Major, you've been recording this conversation, and that recording represents an unacceptable security risk to ongoing operations." "What ongoing operations?" Ghost asked, genuinely curious about the scope of Meridian's criminal activities. Aircraft interception was just the beginning, wasn't it? "Major, Meridian Systems has been conducting military operations that the government needed, but couldn't officially authorize for 15 years. We've eliminated terrorist leaders, disrupted weapons shipments, and protected American interests in ways that would be impossible through official channels." Richardson's tone carried the conviction of someone who believed his own justifications. The Flight 447 incident was unfortunate, but it was necessary to protect operations that have saved thousands of American lives. Ghost recognized the classic rationalization of people who had gradually shifted from legitimate intelligence work to criminal activity. And murdering 293 innocent passengers was going to protect those operations. How exactly? By eliminating witnesses to classified military capabilities, Richardson replied without hesitation. "Major, you've been out of the intelligence community too long. You've forgotten that sometimes protecting the greater good requires accepting unpalatable costs." Outside the conference room, Ghost could hear the distinct sound of explosive breaches and tactical team movement. Her extraction team was fighting their way through Meridian security forces, but the facility's design suggested it could hold out against a significant assault. Richardson activated an intercom system. "All personnel, we have a hostile intelligence operative in Conference Room Alpha. Implement Containment Protocol 7 immediately." Ghost's training kicked in as she realized that Containment Protocol 7 probably meant killing everyone in the conference room and destroying all evidence of the conversation. Her hidden recording equipment had captured enough evidence to prosecute the entire conspiracy, but only if she survived to deliver it. "Mr. Richardson," she said, standing slowly with her hands visible, "you might want to reconsider your next move. Because killing a federal agent conducting an authorized intelligence operation is going to attract attention that even your high-level connections can't suppress." Richardson's hand moved toward a weapon concealed beneath his jacket, and Ghost realized that her years of disappearing when everyone expected her to die were about to be tested one final time. The next 30 seconds unfolded with the violent choreography of close-quarters combat. Richardson's hand had barely cleared his concealed weapon when Ghost moved, her military training transforming her from seated negotiator to lethal combatant in a single fluid motion. She dove left as Richardson's first shot shattered the conference table where she had been sitting, rolled behind a bank of computer equipment, and came up with a tactical advantage that her years of combat experience had taught her to recognize and exploit. Richardson was positioned near the room's only exit, but his corporate environment had made him overconfident in technological solutions to physical threats. Ghost's fingers found the emergency lighting controls, plunging the conference room into darkness that neutralized Richardson's positional advantage while activating her own training in low-light combat operations. The sound of his breathing, the rustle of his clothing, the slight scrape of his shoes against the floor, all became navigation aids in an environment where she had the tactical superiority. "Major, you're only delaying the inevitable," Richardson called out, his voice betraying the first hint of uncertainty. "This facility is designed to contain threats like you." Ghost's response was to move silently to a new position, using the room's acoustics to mask her location while triangulating Richardson's position based on his voice. Her hidden recording equipment was still functioning, capturing audio that would provide prosecutors with evidence of attempted murder in addition to the conspiracy charges. The sounds of combat from the facility's corridors were growing closer, suggesting that her extraction team was making progress despite Meridian security measures. But Ghost knew she couldn't rely on rescue. She had to neutralize the immediate threat while protecting the intelligence she had gathered. Richardson fired twice more, his shots guided by desperation rather than tactical precision. The muzzle flashes revealed his exact position and confirmed Ghost's assessment that he was operating on corporate executive instincts rather than military training. Ghost moved with the silent efficiency of someone who had conducted similar operations in environments far more hostile than corporate conference rooms. Her approach was calculated to minimize injury while maximizing tactical advantage. Richardson was more valuable as a witness than as a casualty. When she struck, it was with the precise application of force that ended resistance without causing permanent damage. Richardson's weapon clattered across the floor as he collapsed, conscious but immobilized, while Ghost secured the room and prepared for the arrival of her extraction team. The facility's alarms were still wailing when the conference room door exploded inward, admitting a tactical team whose equipment and bearing identified them as the kind of operators who conducted missions that never appeared in official reports. Their leader, a woman whose tactical gear couldn't disguise her obvious authority, surveyed the scene with professional satisfaction. "Ghost, we need to move. This facility is about to become very unfriendly territory," she announced, while her team secured Richardson and prepared him for extraction. Ghost gathered the recording equipment that contained evidence of the most significant defense contractor conspiracy in American history, knowing that the next phase of the operation would determine whether justice would be served or whether powerful interests would find ways to suppress the truth. The extraction from Meridian's facility required the kind of tactical precision that Ghost had witnessed but never participated in during her military service. The team moved through corridors filled with smoke and the aftermath of breached security barriers, their route planned to avoid remaining resistance while ensuring the safe removal of both Ghost and Richardson. "Status report," Ghost asked the team leader as they navigated toward the extraction point. "Facility secured, intelligence gathered, and approximately 40 Meridian personnel in custody," came the professional response. "The aircraft in the hangars are being secured as evidence, and their maintenance records are providing a complete picture of illegal operations dating back 15 years. Ghost felt a surge of satisfaction as she realized that the conspiracy that had nearly killed everyone aboard Flight 447 was finally being dismantled. But her experience with complex intelligence operations warned her that people with this level of power and resources wouldn't surrender without using every weapon at their disposal. The extraction helicopter was a military aircraft whose presence over Nevada airspace suggested that this operation had the highest level of government authorization. As they lifted off from Meridian's facility, Ghost could see federal law enforcement vehicles converging on the site from multiple directions. "Deputy Director Harrison wants to speak with you immediately," the team leader informed Ghost, handing her a secure satellite phone. Harrison's voice carried the satisfaction of someone who had just achieved a major victory in a long-running investigation. "Major, the intelligence you gathered has given us everything we need to roll up this entire network. We have evidence of defense contractor fraud, illegal arms sales, conspiracy to commit murder, and treason reaching into the highest levels of government and military command." Ghost watched the Nevada landscape disappear beneath them as the helicopter flew toward a destination that she assumed would be another facility that didn't officially exist. What about the passengers from Flight 447? Are they still at risk? "The threats against Flight 447 passengers have been neutralized," Harrison confirmed. "The people behind those threats are either in custody or facing imminent arrest. Major, your actions over the Atlantic and inside Meridian's facility have prevented mass murder and exposed a conspiracy that threatened national security." The weight of what had been accomplished began to settle on Ghost's shoulders. What had started as a routine flight from Europe had become an investigation that would reshape how military contractors operated and how intelligence operations were overseen. But Ghost's experience with complex operations had taught her that victory in one phase didn't guarantee success in the larger mission. "Sir, what happens to the evidence I gathered? People with this level of power don't usually accept defeat quietly." Harrison's pause suggested he shared her concerns. "Major, that's something we'll need to discuss when you arrive for debriefing. The political ramifications of this investigation are significant." As the helicopter carried Ghost toward whatever came next, she reflected on the journey that had taken her from sleeping passenger in seat 7A to undercover operative dismantling a conspiracy that had threatened hundreds of innocent lives. The woman who had earned her call sign by disappearing when everyone expected her to die had instead chosen to emerge from the shadows and fight for justice in the full light of day. The debriefing facility where Ghost's helicopter landed was unlike any military installation she had previously visited. The buildings were modern and unmarked, the personnel wore no identifying insignia, and the security measures suggested operations that required the highest levels of classification. Deputy Director Harrison met Ghost on the landing pad. His expression: "This is Royal Navy Ark Royal. We are 90 miles southeast of your position and closing." Ghost smiled grimly as she heard the voices of legitimate military forces responding to their emergency call. Whatever conspiracy had sent 6 unidentified aircraft after them, it couldn't withstand the scrutiny of international military assistance. The storm was beginning to weaken around them, and through breaks in the clouds, Ghost could see clear sky ahead. Soon they would emerge from their temporary sanctuary, but now they wouldn't be alone against their unknown adversaries. The first sign of approaching help came in the form of 2 CF-18 Hornets from the Royal Canadian Air Force, their navigation lights visible through the dissipating storm clouds. Ghost felt a surge of relief as she recognized the distinctive silhouette of friendly fighters. "Northwest 447, this is Maple Leader. We have you on radar and are taking up escort positions. Please describe the nature of your threat." Ghost keyed the radio with professional satisfaction. "Maple Leader, we were intercepted by 6 unidentified military aircraft approximately 1 hour ago. They used electronic voice distortion, refused to identify themselves, and fired warning shots when we attempted evasive maneuvers. The Canadian pilot's response carried the cold anger of someone who took threats to civilian aircraft personally. Copy that. 447. We have multiple radar contacts in your vicinity, but they're maintaining distance since we arrived. Can you identify aircraft type? Ghost studied the radar display, where the 6 hostile contacts had reformed at the edge of radar range, clearly visible but no longer approaching. Negative on aircraft type, but formation flying suggests professional military training. These aren't amateur pilots. What happened next would become the subject of classified military reports and international diplomatic inquiries. The 6 unidentified aircraft, faced with the arrival of legitimate military forces, simply vanished from radar screens. No transponder signals, no radio transmissions, no trace of their existence except for the testimony of everyone aboard Flight 447. Maple Leader, the unknown contacts have disappeared from radar, Morrison reported, his voice carrying a mixture of relief and confusion. Copy that. 447. We show negative radar contact on the unknowns. They've either landed somewhere or gone completely dark. The Canadian pilot paused, then continued with professional concern. Northwest 447, we're going to escort you to Halifax International Airport. There are going to be a lot of questions when you land. Ghost nodded, beginning the process of returning Flight 447 to normal flight operations. But even as she guided the aircraft toward safety, her mind was working through the implications of what had just happened. Someone with access to military aircraft and professional pilots had attempted to intercept a civilian airliner, and that someone had connections powerful enough to make 6 military aircraft disappear without a trace when confronted by legitimate authorities. The diplomatic pouch that was supposed to be aboard Flight 447 contained evidence of a planned terrorist attack. The courier who should have been carrying it was dead. And now, 293 passengers had witnessed an act of air piracy that would have international ramifications. As Halifax's lights appeared on the horizon, Ghost realized that landing safely was just the beginning of a much larger and more dangerous story. Halifax International Airport had transformed into a fortress by the time Flight 447 appeared on approach. Ghost could see military vehicles lining the runway, emergency response teams positioned at strategic intervals, and what appeared to be enough federal agents to investigate a small war. The sight should have been reassuring, but her combat experience had taught her to be suspicious of overwhelming official responses. Northwest 447,